I think I love him more now than I ever did.
At 88 years old, Cary Granft's widow finally broke her silence about why she never attended his funeral.
And you talk in the book about how he changed. He became controlling in many ways. Almost like a light switch went off. What do you think happened?
Well, it happens in many marriages, doesn't it?
It does.
Behind the charm lived a man whose darkness would drive away the only woman he ever trusted enough to have a child with.
I think it's because he trusted me because he felt safe.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, no.
Now, decades after his death, the woman who knew his deepest secrets is ready to reveal why their fairy tale romance became a nightmare that haunted her for years. So let's get into it. The year was 1961, and 23-year-old Diane Cannon had just returned from Rome, broke but alive with artistic dreams. She was working as a struggling actress when her agent called with news that would change her life forever. Cary Granft wanted to meet her.
Have you ever been hit by a stun gun? It was, oh my goodness,
Really?
Can anyone be this beautiful? Can anyone be this charming? Can anyone be this electric?
At 57, Cary Granft was at the absolute peak of his powers. He was the biggest movie star in the world, the man every woman wanted and every man wanted to be. When he walked into that first meeting, Diane felt something she'd never experienced before, pure, overwhelming magnetism that left her breathless. Granft had orchestrated their introduction carefully. He'd seen her work and decided she was different from the parade of starlets who usually caught his attention. There was something real about her, something that intrigued the man who had spent decades perfecting his own carefully constructed persona.
Because there was an immediate connection. We were both seekers, and we both connected in a very, very special way.
Their first conversations revealed two souls searching for something deeper than Hollywood's superficial glamour. Granft had been married 3 times before, to Virginia Cherrill, Barbara Hutton, and Betsy Drake. But none of those relationships had produced the spiritual connection he found with Diane. She wasn't impressed by his fame or fortune. She was drawn to the wounded boy he kept hidden beneath the polished exterior. The age difference was staggering. He was older than her father, but it didn't matter. They talked for hours about philosophy, life, and their shared hunger for meaning beyond the movie business. Granft had spent his entire adult life becoming Cary Granft, leaving Archie Leach far behind in the poverty of his Bristol childhood. But with Diane, glimpses of that abandoned boy began to surface. Their courtship was a masterclass in old Hollywood romance. Granft showered her with attention, taking her to the finest restaurants, introducing her to his world of privilege and power. He was gentlemanly, sophisticated, and utterly devoted to winning her over. For a young woman from Tacoma, Washington, it was like being swept into a fairy tale. But even in those early days, there were hints of what was to come. Granft was particular about everything: how she dressed, how she styled her hair, even how she wrote thank you notes. At first, Diane found it charming, seeing it as evidence of how much he cared about her. She had no way of knowing that his attention to detail masked a deeper need for control that would eventually consume their relationship. The romance intensified over months of dinners, long walks, and intimate conversations that stretched late into the night. Granft was pursuing her with the same meticulous planning he brought to his film roles, and Diane was falling deeper under his spell with each passing day. She was witnessing the performance of a lifetime, but she didn't know she was the audience. After 5 years of courtship, Cary Granft finally proposed to Diane Cannon in 1965. She was 28, he was 61, and Hollywood watched in fascination as one of the world's most eligible bachelors prepared to marry again. The wedding was small and private, but the implications were enormous. This was Grant's 4th attempt at matrimony, and everyone wondered if this time would be different.
I think it's because he trusted me because he felt safe.
Granft had chosen Diane for reasons that went deeper than attraction or convenience. Unlike his previous wives, she represented something he'd never found before: a woman he trusted completely, someone he believed could handle the responsibility of carrying on his legacy. The decision to have a child with her was calculated and profound, marking her as different from every other woman in his life. But the moment they exchanged vows, something shifted dramatically in Grant's behavior. The charming suitor who had courted her so patiently disappeared, replaced by someone she barely recognized.
I loved in the beginning.
Yeah.
It changed the way I wore my hair, the way I dressed,
Right.
the way I wrote thank you notes, and I loved it because it garnered such attention from him to me. But Right after he asked me to marry him, it changed.
The transformation was swift and shocking. The man who had once asked for her opinions now demanded compliance. He controlled what she wore, how she styled her hair, whom she could see, and where she could go. The attention to detail that had seemed romantic during their courtship revealed itself as something far more sinister, an obsessive need to control every aspect of her existence. Grant's controlling behavior stemmed from deep psychological wounds that he'd never properly addressed. His childhood in Bristol had been marked by poverty, abandonment, and the devastating lie that his mother had died when she'd actually been committed to a mental institution. That early betrayal had left him with an inability to trust and a desperate need to control his environment to prevent further abandonment. John found herself trapped in a gilded cage. She was married to the most famous man in Hollywood, living in luxury most people could only dream of, but she was slowly losing herself in the process. Grant's need for perfection extended to every aspect of their life together, and any deviation from his expectations was met with cold disapproval that could last for days. The isolation was perhaps the most devastating aspect of their marriage. Grant systematically cut her off from friends and family members he deemed unsuitable influences. He monitored her phone calls, questioned her about her whereabouts, and made it clear that her primary role was to be the perfect wife to Cary Granft, not to maintain her own identity as Diane Cannon. Friends who knew them during this period later described the dynamic as deeply troubling. Grant, who could be charming and witty in public, became a different person behind closed doors. The pressure of maintaining his perfect public image had created internal tensions that he released through his need to control his private world completely. Despite the growing problems in their marriage, Diane became pregnant with their daughter Jennifer in 1966. Grant was overjoyed at the prospect of fatherhood, seeing it as the ultimate validation of their relationship and his own capacity for love. But even this happy development couldn't heal the fundamental cracks in their union. As their marriage continued to deteriorate, Cary Granft introduced a solution that would push their relationship into even more dangerous territory. His previous wife, Betsy Drake, had introduced him to LSD therapy in the late 1950s, and Grant had become a passionate advocate for the therapeutic potential. Grant genuinely believed that LSD could repair what was broken between them. He had undergone dozens of supervised LSD sessions himself, claiming they had helped him understand his childhood trauma and become a better person. When he suggested that Diane try he framed it as the ultimate expression of trust and intimacy. But Diane's instincts rebelled against the idea. She had witnessed firsthand how Grant's previous LSD experiences had affected him, and she knew that his marriage to Betsy Drake had ended despite their shared psychedelic journey. Her logical question cut straight to the heart of Grant's flawed reasoning.
I said, how can that be such a good thing, Cary? If you and Betsy took it and divorced, then what kind of an ad is that for us to use it together?
Grant's response revealed the depth of his desperation to save their marriage. He was convinced that his relationship with Diane was different, deeper, more meaningful than anything he'd experienced before. The LSD, he believed, would allow them to connect on a spiritual level that would transcend their earthly problems. Against her better judgment, Diane agreed to try the experience was everything she had feared it would be: intense, overwhelming, and ultimately destructive to their already fragile relationship. Instead of bringing them closer together, the LSD sessions exposed the fundamental incompatibilities that no amount of pharmaceutical intervention could resolve. Grant had spent years using LSD as a way to explore his psyche and attempt to heal his childhood wounds. He had written articles for Ladies' Home Journal promoting the benefits and had become something of an unofficial spokesperson for psychedelic therapy among Hollywood's elite. But his enthusiasm for LSD was also a symptom of his lifelong search for external solutions to internal problems. The sessions revealed uncomfortable truths about both of them. Grant's need for control extended even into their psychedelic experiences, as he tried to guide and direct Diane's trips rather than allowing her to have her own authentic experiences. For Diane, the sessions became another form of manipulation, another way for Grant to reshape her according to his vision of what she should be.
That's one of the big messages of my book, Russell. When you do something that you know you shouldn't do and go against your inner gut that says don't do it.
Diane's later reflection on the LSD experiment revealed the deeper lesson she had learned from her marriage to Grant. Ignoring her instincts in favor of pleasing him had been a form of spiritual death, a gradual erosion of her authentic self in service of his needs and expectations. The failure of the LSD therapy to save their marriage marked the beginning of the end for Cary Granft and Dyan Cannon. They had tried chemistry, psychology, and pharmaceutical intervention, but nothing could bridge the gap between Grant's need for control and Dyan's need for autonomy. By 1968, the fairy tale marriage between Cary Granft and Dyan Cannon had become a carefully maintained illusion. In public, they appeared to be the perfect Hollywood couple. He, the distinguished leading man, she, the beautiful young wife and mother. But behind closed doors, their relationship had devolved into a psychological battlefield that was destroying them both. The birth of their daughter Jennifer in February 1966 had temporarily provided hope that parenthood might heal their fractured union. Grant was a devoted father, finally able to express the love and tenderness that seemed to elude him in his romantic relationships. But even his genuine affection for their child couldn't compensate for the fundamental dysfunction in his marriage to Dyan. Grant's controlling behavior had escalated to the point where Dyan felt like a prisoner in her own life. He monitored her movements, controlled her finances, and used their daughter as leverage to ensure her compliance with his demands. The man who could charm anyone in public became cold and manipulative the moment they were alone. The psychological toll on Dyan was devastating. She was losing weight, struggling with depression, and beginning to question her own sanity. Grant's gaslighting techniques were subtle but effective. He would deny conversations that had taken place, rewrite history to suit his narrative, and convince her that her perceptions of their relationship were wrong. Friends and family members who tried to intervene found themselves cut off from the couple. Grant had successfully isolated Dyan from her support system, making her completely dependent on him for validation and reality testing. It was a classic pattern of psychological abuse, made more insidious by Grant's public reputation as a gentleman and sophisticate. The breaking point came during one of their many arguments about Dyan's desire for independence. She wanted to resume her acting career to maintain some sense of her own identity beyond being Mrs. Cary Granft. His response was swift and decisive. If she couldn't be satisfied with the life he'd given her, perhaps she should consider whether she was worthy of it at all. That moment of clarity cut through years of confusion and self-doubt. Dyan realized that no amount of love, therapy, or compromise could change the fundamental dynamic between them. Grant needed complete control to feel secure, and she needed autonomy to feel alive. They were incompatible at the most basic level. The decision to leave wasn't easy. Grant was still one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, with the influence to destroy her career and limit her access to their daughter. But staying meant accepting a slow death of her spirit, and Dyan had finally found the courage to choose life over security. When she told Grant she wanted a divorce, his reaction confirmed everything she had come to understand about their relationship. There was no surprise, no pleading, no emotional breakdown, just a cold calculation of how to minimize the damage to his reputation and maintain maximum control over the situation. The divorce proceedings were brutal and public, with Grant using every weapon at his disposal to paint Dyan as an unstable mother and unfaithful wife. The man who had once claimed to love her more than life itself was now determined to destroy her credibly and professionally. The divorce was finalized in 1968, but the battle between Cary Granft and Dyan Cannon continued for years. Grant used his wealth and influence to make Dyan's life difficult, challenging her custody rights and undermining her attempts to rebuild her career. The charming man who had swept her off her feet had revealed himself to be vindictive and cruel when he couldn't get his way. But time has a way of revealing truth, and as the years passed, Dyan began to understand the deeper forces that had shaped their relationship. Grant's childhood trauma, the abandonment by his father, the institutionalization of his mother, the poverty and neglect of his early years, had created wounds that never properly healed. His entire adult life had been an elaborate performance designed to hide those wounds from the world and from himself.
He did create himself. I think he stole from different areas and different people. But he was very much the same person at home that you saw on screen. He was funny, he was charming, he was thoughtful.
Jennifer Grant's memories of her father revealed the complexity of the man Dyan had married. To his daughter, Grant was loving, devoted, and present in ways he had never been able to be with his wives. The capacity for love was there, but it was locked behind walls of fear and control that made intimate adult relationships nearly impossible. When Cary Granft died of a stroke in 1986 at the age of 82, Diane faced a decision that would define how she remembered their relationship. The funeral would be a major Hollywood event, attended by every important figure in the entertainment industry. As his most recent ex-wife and the mother of his only child, she was expected to attend. But Diane chose to stay away. Her absence was noted by the press and interpreted as everything from grief to spite. But the real reason was simpler and more profound. She had spent years rebuilding her life after their divorce, learning to trust her instincts again and finding her own identity beyond being Cary Grant's wife. Attending his funeral would have been stepping back into a role she had fought so hard to escape. The decision wasn't made out of hatred or revenge. By the time of Grant's death, Diane had found a measure of peace with their relationship, and even a renewed appreciation for the man he had been beneath all the controlling behavior. The years between their 1968 divorce and Grant's death in 1986 had given Diane the distance she needed to see their marriage with clarity rather than pain. She had rebuilt her career, won Academy Award nominations, and most importantly, learned to trust herself again. The woman who had once questioned her own sanity in the face of Grant's manipulation had become strong enough to view their relationship through the lens of understanding rather than bitterness. Grant's final day began like so many others in his twilight years, preparing to charm another audience with stories from Hollywood's golden age. November 29, 1986, found him in Davenport, Iowa, a world away from the glittering studios where he'd once reigned supreme. At 82, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture still commanding, he was rehearsing for what would unknowingly be his last performance of A Conversation with Cary Granft. The afternoon rehearsal at the Adler Theater started normally enough. Grant moved through his familiar routine, preparing clips from his greatest films, polishing anecdotes that had delighted audiences across the country. But something was wrong. The man who had never missed a cue, never faltered in front of an audience, began feeling unwell. His legendary composure cracked as weakness overtook him. They helped him from the stage back to his suite at the Black Hawk Hotel, where the gravity of the situation became clear. A doctor's examination revealed the devastating truth. Grant was suffering a massive stroke. The brain that had memorized thousands of lines, charmed millions of fans, and orchestrated one of entertainment's most successful careers was under attack from within. By evening, Grant had slipped into a coma. The ambulance ride to St. Luke's Hospital was a blur of sirens and desperate medical intervention. At 11:22 p.m., the man born Archie Leach in the slums of Bristol drew his final breath, far from the luxury and glamour that had defined his public life. For Diane, the news carried a profound sadness mixed with relief. She grieved for the boy who had never learned that love didn't require control, and for the husband who might have been if fear hadn't ruled his heart. Grant had requested no funeral, choosing privacy even in death, his ashes scattered in the Pacific Ocean like the last remnants of a carefully constructed dream.
I think I love him more now than I ever did.
The love that Diane had, however, was for the wounded boy from Bristol who had never learned how to be vulnerable without being controlling, not for the manufactured persona of Cary Granft that had dominated their marriage. Understanding the source of his behavior didn't excuse it, but it allowed her to forgive him and herself for the pain they had caused each other. Diane's final act of independence was choosing not to perform grief for the cameras at Grant's funeral. Instead, she mourned privately, on her own terms, for the relationship they might have had if he had been able to love without controlling and trust without manipulating. Her story serves as a reminder that even the most charming facade can hide devastating dysfunction, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to walk away. At 88, Diane Cannon's confession about why she didn't attend Cary Grant's funeral reveals the ultimate truth about their relationship, that real love requires freedom, and some cages are too beautiful to recognize until it's almost too late to escape. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.